Emma sat in her small kitchen, staring at her phone with tears in her eyes. The call from her brother James had shattered her peaceful morning. Their father, William, had suffered a heart attack and was in the hospital 300 miles away. The kitchen felt smaller than usual as Emma tried to process the news. The coffee in her cup had gone cold, and the morning sunlight streaming through her window seemed too bright for such terrible news. She had spoken to her father just 2 days ago, and he had sounded perfectly fine. He had even joked about teaching Oliver how to ride a bicycle when summer came. Emma had not travelled by plane in over 5 years. Money was always tight as a single mother working 2 jobs to support her 8-year-old son, Oliver. She cleaned offices in the early morning before Oliver woke up, and then worked as a cashier at the local grocery store until evening. Every penny was counted, every expense carefully planned. Flying was something other people did, not something she could afford. But now, nothing else mattered except getting to her father's side. Her hands trembled as she opened her laptop and searched for flights. The prices made her stomach drop. The earliest flight would cost more than she spent on groceries in 2 weeks. She looked at her bank account and felt a wave of panic. She had been saving for Oliver's school supplies, but this was an emergency. With shaking hands, she booked the earliest flight she could find. The ticket cost more than her weekly grocery budget. But love doesn't count pennies. As she clicked the purchase button, she felt both relief and terror. She was going to see her father, but she had no idea how she would manage the rest of the month financially. Emma rushed to her bedroom and pulled out her old suitcase from under the bed. It was dusty and hadn't been used since Oliver was a baby. As she packed her small bag with the few decent clothes she owned, her mind raced with worries. What if the security rules had changed? What if she missed her flight? What if she couldn't find her way around the airport? Oliver watched from the doorway, his school backpack still on his shoulders. He had just come home from school and found his mother packing frantically. "Mummy, are you going somewhere?" he asked, his voice small and confused. Emma stopped packing and looked at her son. His brown hair was messy from playing at recess, and his school uniform was wrinkled. He looked so young and vulnerable standing there. How could she explain that his grandfather might be dying? "Grandpa William is very sick, sweetheart," she said gently, kneeling down to his level. "I need to go see him in the hospital." Oliver's eyes filled with tears. "Is he going to die like Grandma did?" Emma's heart broke a little more. Oliver had been only 5 when his grandmother passed away, and he still asked about her sometimes. She pulled him into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of his strawberry shampoo. "Mummy, will Grandpa be okay?" he asked softly. Emma knelt down and hugged him tight. "We have to believe he will be, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to be brave even when we're scared." That evening, Emma called her neighbor, Mrs. Roberts, a kind widow who had always been helpful when Emma needed someone to watch Oliver. Mrs. Roberts agreed immediately to take care of him, and Emma felt a small relief knowing her son would be in caring hands. Emma barely slept that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about her father. She remembered him teaching her how to ride a bicycle, how he had worked extra hours to buy her a dress for her school dance, how he had held her hand when she was scared to go to the dentist. He had been her rock through her divorce, her constant support as she struggled to raise Oliver alone. The next morning, Emma kissed Oliver goodbye and left him with her neighbor, Mrs. Roberts. Oliver clung to her for an extra moment, and she promised to call him as soon as she could. "Take care of yourself, dear," Mrs. Roberts said, patting Emma's shoulder. "Your father raised a strong daughter. He'll be proud to see you." As the taxi pulled away from their modest home, Emma felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest, she watched her neighborhood fade away through the rear window, seeing the small houses and familiar streets that made up her entire world. The grocery store where she worked was already opening, and she felt guilty for calling in sick. She had no idea that this journey would change her life in ways she never expected. As the taxi headed toward the airport, Emma clutched her phone and whispered a prayer for her father, for safe travels and for the strength to face whatever waited ahead. At the airport, Emma felt completely lost. The building was much bigger than she remembered, with high ceilings and bright lights that made everything feel cold and unwelcoming. People rushed past her with rolling suitcases, talking loudly on their phones or checking their watches with worried expressions. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going except her. Everything seemed different from her last flight years ago. The check-in counters had been replaced with tall machines that beeped and flashed. Signs everywhere mentioned new security rules and procedures she didn't understand. Words like enhanced screening and liquid restrictions were written in bold letters, but they might as well have been in a foreign language. Emma stood in the middle of the busy terminal, holding her small suitcase and looking round desperately. A family with 3 young children pushed past her, the mother javeling a baby while the father carried to car seats. An elderly man in a business suit bumped into her shoulder without apologizing. His face buried in his phone, the lines were longer than she remembered, snaking round barriers and extending far beyond what she could see. People looked confused and frustrated, checking their phones constantly and shifting from foot to foot. Some passengers were taking off their shoes and putting them in grey plastic bins. Others were arguing with airport staff about bottles of water and tubes of toothpaste. Emma joined what she hoped was the right line, her heart beating fast in her chest. The woman in front of her was complaining loudly to her husband about having to throw away her expensive face cream. Behind Emma, a businessman tapped his foot impatiently and kept checking his expensive watch. As the line moved slowly forward, Emma watched other passengers go through the security process. They placed their belongings in bins, walked through tall metal detectors, and sometimes had to step aside for additional screening. It all looked so complicated and scary. Emma approached the security checkpoint with her small carry-on bag, her hands shaking slightly. She had packed so quickly that morning that she wasn't even sure what was in her bag anymore. What if she had something that wasn't allowed? What if they thought she was suspicious? The TSA agent at the front of the line was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and grey hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read Margaret, and she wore the official blue uniform with patches and badges. Despite the serious nature of her job, she had a warm smile that made Emma feel slightly less nervous. Margaret noticed Emma's nervous expression immediately. She had worked at the airport for 15 years and had learned to spot travelers who were scared or confused. Emma's wide eyes and the way she clutched her bag tightly were clear signs that she needed extra help. First time flying in a while, Margaret asked gently, her voice cutting through the noise of the busy security area. Emma nodded, her voice barely a whisper. My father is in the hospital. I don't know what I'm doing. The words came out in a rush, and she felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes again. Margaret's expression softened immediately. She had heard similar stories countless times during her years working security. Family emergencies, last-minute trips, people who hadn't flown in years suddenly thrust into unfamiliar situations. Her job was about security, but it was also about helping people during some of the most stressful moments of their lives. I'm sorry to hear that, Margaret said sincerely. Let me help you through this step by step. As Emma struggled with the new liquid restrictions, pulling out a small bottle of hand lotion and a travel-size shampoo, Margaret patiently explained each rule. The technology Emma didn't recognize included new body scanners and enhanced screening, procedures that hadn't existed during her last flight. Other passengers behind her began to sigh impatiently. A man in an expensive suit checked his watch and muttered something about missing his connection. A woman with perfectly styled hair rolled her eyes and made an exaggerated huffing sound. Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She wanted to run away, to go back home where everything was familiar and safe. The businessman behind her spoke loudly to his phone, clearly wanting everyone to hear how important he was. "I'm stuck behind some woman who doesn't know how to go through security," he said rudely. Emma's face turned red with shame. She fumbled with her bag, trying to move faster, but that only made her more clumsy. She dropped her boarding pass, and it fluttered to the ground. But then she thought of her father's gentle smile, of all the times he had encouraged her to be brave. She remembered him teaching her to ride a bicycle, how he had held the back of the seat and run alongside her until she found her balance. "You're braver than you think, Emma," he had always told her. She took a deep breath and listened carefully as Margaret explained each new rule with patience and kindness. "These changes might seem overwhelming," Margaret said, "but they're here to keep everyone safe, including you and your father." While waiting in line, Emma noticed an elderly man standing a few spots ahead of her. He had silver hair and wore a brown cardigan that looked hand-wear-upon. His face showed the same confusion and worry that Emma felt in her own heart. He kept looking at the signs above them, then at his belongings, then back at the signs again. The elderly man was trying to organize his belongings according to the new rules, but his hands shook as he held a small plastic bag. Inside the bag, Emma could see various small bottles and containers. He pulled out each item, studied it carefully, then put it back in, clearly unsure about what he was supposed to do. Emma watched as he struggled with his old brown leather suitcase. The zipper seemed stuck, and he was having trouble opening one of the compartments. Other passengers continued to push past him, and he stepped aside repeatedly to let them through, making his situation even more difficult. "Excuse me," Emma said quietly, stepping forward. Her voice was soft, but there was a kindness in it that made the elderly man look up immediately. "Would you like some help?" The man looked up with grateful eyes that reminded Emma of her own father. His face was weathered and kind, with deep lines round his eyes that spoke of years of laughter and worry. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that had slipped down his nose, and he pushed them up with a shaking finger. "I feel so foolish," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "I used to fly for work all the time, but everything is so different now. I'm Henry. By the way, I'm trying to visit my wife in the hospital in Chicago." Emma felt her heart squeeze with sympathy. Here was someone else facing the same kind of emergency she was. Someone else who felt lost and scared in this confusing place. She stepped closer and smiled for the first time that day. "I'm Emma," she said gently. "My father is in the hospital too. We can figure it out together." Henry's face brightened considerably. "That would be wonderful. I taught high school for 40 years. But I feel like a student again trying to learn all these new rules." Emma helped Henry organize his belongings, showing him how to put his liquids in the clear plastic bag that Margaret had given her together. They read the signs and tried to understand what each symbol meant. Emma found that helping Henry made her feel less nervous about her own situation as they worked together. A young woman with curly red hair and wearing scrubs approached them. She had been watching their interaction and seemed touched by their kindness to each other. Her name tag from the hospital where she worked was still clipped to her colorful scrubs. "I'm Sophie," she said with a bright smile. "I couldn't help but notice you two helping each other. I'm a nurse, and I just flew last week for my job interview. Maybe I can help explain some of these new procedures. Soon, they were joined by Sophie, who was traveling to start a new job at a children's hospital in another state. She had flown recently and knew some of the new procedures. Her youth and energy brought a different perspective to their little group, and she was eager to share what she had learned. The three of them began helping each other, sharing tips and offering encouragement. Sophie explained that the new liquid rules were actually quite simple once you understood them. Henry shared stories about his flying experiences from years past, which helped them all understand how much things had changed. Emma found herself laughing for the first time since receiving the phone call about her father. The key is to take everything out of your pockets, Sophie explained, demonstrating with her own belongings, phones, keys, coins, everything, and make sure your liquids are in containers smaller than 3 ounces. Henry nodded thoughtfully. In my day, we just walked through a simple metal detector. But I suppose these new measures are for everyone's safety. Exactly, Sophie agreed. And don't worry about taking your time. The agents are usually very patient with people who are trying their best, as they continued to wait in line. Their conversation turned to why they were traveling. Emma learned that Henry had been married to his wife, Dorothy. For 52 years, she had fallen and broken her hip, and the doctors said she needed surgery. Henry had driven to airports in 3 different cities before finally finding a flight that would get him there in time. It's funny, Sophie said as they waited together, moving slowly forward in the security line. I was so nervous about traveling alone to start this new job. But meeting you both makes me feel less scared. Henry chuckled, and the sound was warm and comforting. My wife Dorothy always said that when people come together, even the biggest problems become smaller. She's the wise one in our family. Emma felt a warm feeling in her chest. These strangers had become her companions in just a few minutes. The scary airport suddenly felt less frightening with friends by her side. The overwhelming signs and confusing procedures seemed manageable when shared with people who cared. Daughters Emma, Henry, and Sophie moved through security together. Something beautiful happened. The atmosphere around them seemed to shift from one of stress and frustration to one of understanding and support. What had started as 3 strangers helping each other began to spread to the people around them. The TSA agents who had seemed so intimidating became helpful guides. Margaret, who had first helped Emma, noticed the friendship that had formed between the 3 travelers. She made sure to explain each step of the process clearly, not just to Emma, Henry, and Sophie, but to other confused passengers who were watching and learning. Another TSA agent, a tall man named Robert, saw Henry struggling to lift his heavy bag onto the conveyor belt. Instead of hurrying him along, Robert stepped forward and helped guide the bag into the right position. Take your time, sir, he said kindly. We want to make sure everyone gets through safely. Other passengers, seeing their kindness to each other, began offering help too. A well-dressed businessman named David, who had been checking his phone impatiently just minutes before, noticed Henry having trouble with his shoes. The new security rules required everyone to remove their shoes, and Henry's arthritis made it difficult for him to bend down. Here, let me help you with that, David said, kneeling down to help Henry untie his laces. I have a grandfather about your age, and I know how tricky these things can be. Henry looked surprised and grateful. Thank you so much, young man. People like you give me hope. A mother named Lisa, who was traveling with her 2 young children, overheard Sophie mention that she was nervous about starting her new job. Lisa had been struggling to keep her kids calm while going through security. But she took a moment to encourage Sophie. "You're going to do wonderfully," Lisa said warmly. "Any hospital would be lucky to have a nurse who cares as much as you do." She then offered Sophie some crackers from her bag. "I always pack extra snacks when I travel with the kids. Would you like some?" Sophie accepted gratefully, and even helped Lisa organize her children's belongings as they went through the security process. The two kids, a boy and a girl round 7 and 9 years old, were fascinated by Sophie's colorful scrubs and asked her questions about being a nurse. The airport, which had felt like a cold, confusing place, began to feel like a community. People who had been strangers just minutes before were now helping each other navigate the security process. The long lines that had seemed endless now moved with more patience and understanding. Emma watched all of this happen round her aunt. Felt amazed. She realized that the new security measures, once she understood them, actually made sense. They were designed to protect everyone's families, just like hers. The technology that seemed scary was actually quite simple once someone explained it patiently. The body scanner that had looked like something from a science fiction movie was just a way to make sure very own was safe. The liquid restrictions that had seemed so complicated were actually straightforward rules designed to prevent dangerous items from getting on planes. Even the requirement to remove shoes, which had seemed silly, was an important safety measure, you know. Emma said to her new friends as they collected their belongings on the other side of security. "I was so afraid of all these changes, but maybe change doesn't have to be scary if we face it together." Henry nodded thoughtfully as he put his shoes back on. "My wife Dorothy always told her students that learning new things is easier when you have good friends to help you. I think she would like both of you very much." Sophie smiled and helped Henry with his jacket. "I think she sounds like a very wise woman. I can't wait to meet her when she gets better." Margaret, the TSA agent, overheard their conversation as she helped another passenger. She smiled and walked over to them. "That's exactly right," she said warmly. "We're all just trying to take care of each other. That's what all these rules are really about, making sure everyone gets home safely to their families." Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude toward Margaret. "Thank you for being so patient with me. I was so scared when I first got here." "That's what we're here for," Margaret replied. "I hope your father feels better soon, and remember, if you need help on your way back, just ask. We're always here to help." As Emma walked toward her gate with Henry and Sophie, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: confidence. She had faced her fears and discovered that she was stronger than she knew. The scared, confused woman who had entered the airport that morning was gone, replaced by someone who had learned that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. The three friends exchanged phone numbers before going to their separate gates, promising to stay in touch and update each other about their family members. Emma sat down at her gate and called Oliver to let him know she was safe. Emma arrived at the hospital just as her father was waking up from surgery. The long flight had felt endless, but now she was finally here, rushing through the stale hallways with her small suitcase rolling behind her. The smell of disinfectant and the sound of beeping machines filled the air, but all Emma could focus on was reaching room 314. When she pushed open the door, she saw her father lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than she remembered. His usually neat grey hair was messy, and there were tubes and wires connected to his arms. But when he heard her footsteps, William slowly opened his eyes. His face lit up when he saw her, and tears of joy filled both their eyes. The worried expression that had been on his face melted away, replaced by the warm smile that Emma had loved her entire life. She dropped her suitcase and rushed to his bedside, careful not to disturb the medical equipment. "Emma, my brave girl," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with love. "You came so far." Emma took his hand gently, feeling how cold and thin it was. "Of course I came. Dad, I wouldn't be anywhere else. I learned something on the way here." "Dad," Emma said, holding his hand tightly, "I learned that I'm braver than I thought, and that there are good people everywhere willing to help." She told him about her journey through the airport, about Margaret, the TSA agent who had been so patient, about Henry and Sophie who had become her friends, and about all the strangers who had shown kindness to each other. William listened with growing pride, his eyes getting brighter with each part of her story. "You sound like a different person," he said softly, stronger somehow. "I feel different too." Emma admitted, "I was so scared when I got that phone call from James. But now I know I can handle more than I thought I could." Over the following weeks, as William recovered, Emma traveled back and forth several times. The doctors said he would need physical therapy and regular checkups, so Emma found herself making the trip every 2 weeks. Each trip became easier. She knew exactly which gate to go to, which security line moved fastest, and how to pack her bag efficiently. She kept in touch with Henry and Sophie, who had become real friends. Henry sent her pictures of his wife Dorothy, who was recovering well from her hip surgery. Sophie shared stories about her new job at the Children's Hospital, and how much she loved working with young patients. They created a group chat where they checked on each other and shared travel tips. Emma even helped other confused passengers navigate the airport, just as Margaret had helped her. She found herself naturally gravitating toward people who looked lost or scared, offering assistance with the same kindness that had been shown to her. One day, she helped an elderly woman who was flying for the first time to see her new grandchild. Another time, she assisted a young man who was traveling to a job interview and didn't know the new liquid. Restrictions you have such a gift for, helping people. Margaret said one day when she recognized Emma going through security, "Have you ever considered working in customer service or hospitality?" Emma had never thought about it before, but the idea planted a seed in her mind. When she returned home, she started looking into training programs and job opportunities that would use her newfound confidence and people skills. 6 months later, Emma got a promotion at work. Her supervisor had noticed that she was speaking up more in meetings, offering creative solutions to problems, and taking on new challenges without being asked. The confidence she had gained from her airport experience helped her in ways she never expected. "I'd like you to consider becoming our new customer service supervisor," her boss said during their meeting. "You have a natural way of making people feel comfortable and helping them solve problems." Emma accepted the promotion, which came with a significant raise and better benefits for the first time in years. She didn't have to worry about every penny she spent. Oliver noticed the change in his mother, too. She smiled more often, stood up straighter, and seemed to approach life with more energy and optimism. She started taking him on small adventures around their city, visiting museums and parks they had never explored before. "Mummy, you seem happier," he said one evening as they walked home from the library. Emma smiled and ruffled his hair. "I learned that when we face our fears with an open heart, beautiful things can happen." "What does that mean?" Oliver asked, looking up at her with curious eyes. "It means that sometimes the things that scare us the most can teach us the most about ourselves," Emma explained, "and that we're usually stronger and braver than we think we are." Emma often thought about that scary day at the airport. What had started as her worst nightmare had become the beginning of her new life, a life where she knew she could handle whatever changes came her way. The end.